Almighty, all-powerful, and gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you now and we just ask for your blessing on our time here today. We ask that we thank you for our speaker, and we ask that we hear his presentation with the wisdom and in keeping with your ways and your word. And Heavenly Father, we ask your blessing on the people who prepared and served this meal, and on those of us who partake it, in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Thank you. Now Michael Stopp's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please remain standing. Attention, salute, pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. As you all know, my name is Dan Patton. I am the president of the Tulsa Republican Club. I want to welcome you all here. We have our Michael Willis. Are you our treasurer? He really runs the show.
This club?
Yes. He a past president. We'll just call him the clerk. He handles that role in a few other deals. Want to thank some of our elected officials being here. Our great county clerk, Michael Willis. We have our county assessor, John Wright. I saw Senator Dave Rader is here. We have former Representative Scott McEachin. From Congressman Mullen's office, we have Michael Staub. And then from Congressman Hearn's office, we have Brian O'Hare, and Robert Airy is here somewhere. There you are. There you are. I want to thank our sponsors today, Darrell Baskin Realty, as well as Gateway Mortgage, and want to thank the Summit for always being so gracious to host us. Without any further ado, I will move. Is anyone running for office? This is always my favorite part. Does anyone want to announce this early that they're running for office?
I am.
Thank you. You do. I know a good consultant back there. But no, without any further ado, I want to introduce Pat McFerrin. Pat actually gave me my first job in politics, and I will be eternally grateful to him for that. He's the best pollster in the state, one of the best in the nation, and he's just going to tell you about what some of the data he's got from Oklahomans. Thank you very much. Pat?
Thank you all very much. I always enjoy this set. I think this is the third or fourth time I presented to this organization. One of the things I will let you know, you'll notice here, and there'll be another place in the survey presentation we'll have this. If you have a phone, I like to do this. You can text to that number, that 5-digit number, the message Pat M636, and then you can participate in some of the study things that we'll be going through here. Everything's anonymous. I'll delete everything as soon as it's over. But the real reason I like to do this is I think that you're on your phone, you're paying attention to this, and not, on Facebook or Twitter or something. So it makes me feel better about myself as well. So to do that, you don't need to write this minute. It's probably about 10 minutes into the study, and then there'll be another chance too. But while I grab the computer, a good chance to do that. If you have any issues, let me know. We're going to look at a variety of different studies. I believe all of these have been done this year. There are all of them. Everything you're going to see is at least 500 voters. Some of them are 600, have margin of error of around 4% on the overall numbers. One of the things I like to point out is that this is a survey of voters. If you don't care enough to register to vote, I don't care what you think. And if you don't participate in elections, I really don't care much either. Well, at least when it comes to elections. I do market research as well. There I care about if you have dollars or not. But here I care about if you vote. I always like to start by talking about the Oklahoma electorate as a whole. About 28 to 30% of the people who will vote in this presidential election coming up will be over the age of 65. The voting trends continue to go older and older and older. In 2014, for example, I know this number off the top of my head, 42% of the people that voted in the 2014 gubernatorial election were over the age of 65. It comes down during presidential years. I believe it was in the high 30s, the last gubernatorial election. It'll be down in the low 30s or high 20s for this presidential, depending on what happens. But that's what we're looking at right now. If you're under 45, you're in the youngest quartile of voters. And just very few people under 45 participate. We are starting to see some changes in the two metro areas along those lines, but nothing that's real substantial here. I'll point out the bottom chart there, income wise, about a third of Oklahomans live in households making less than $50,000 a year, and about 22% are in households that make more than $100,000 a year. So we're still a relatively poor state. Women vote a little bit better than men. So everything you're going to look at here is 52% female, 48% men. We'll look at party registration here in a little bit, but we are now, when it comes to voting, a majority of those who vote in this state are now Republicans. 39% are Democrats and 10% are independents. Again, just to show you, one of the things I like to do here is I've been reminiscing a lot lately about how things have changed and how things are moving forward, and taking a little bit of a step back to look at the history of our state. This dates back to 1978, when I have some of my polling data. It's the first statewide polling data I have, courtesy of the Ron Schatz campaign for governor back then. But at that point, this is state election board data, the actual registration, 75% of Oklahomans were registered Democrats in 1978. We actually didn't cross until 2016. It became 45-45. So it's pretty recent that Republicans have had the plurality, and they're still not the majority of registered voters in the state. There are a majority of those who actually vote, but not of registered voters. Independents, that number has continued to climb. It's up to 16%, but they vote at such a lower propensity than anybody else. Excuse me.
Are a large majority of the independents young folks?
There are more of those. It changed dramatically when we had voter law change in the state. When that went into before voter law, the Clintons voter law, if someone registered to vote, we had registrars and they handed them the registration back and told them to pick Republican, Democrat, or Independent. After that, if they hand them one that's blank, they default to Independent. So you get people that are less interested that default to Independent. This is, if you ask people when it comes to elections, how do you tend to vote? Do you tend to vote for more Republicans or more Democrats? Again, back in 1978, it was 48 Democrat, 24 Republican. Democrats started with a 24-point advantage. Very little wonder that they were successful in most every statewide election then. Today, we've more than flipped that. It's 57 say they vote for the Republican, 26 for the Democrat. I will tell you, the number, I didn't have a full statewide number, so it's not in here. It dipped during the 2018 election, down below 50 for Republicans. It's now rebounded dramatically, and we'll see some of that here in a little bit. But it was still a very solid Republican majority. Key things that happened, Ronald Reagan, but I'll tell you, the key thing I think is cable news and a larger news cycle, and more national prominent news on a detailed basis. I think Republicans thought, Oklahomans thought they were Democrats until they were more exposed to national Democrats to a great extent. And I mean, we can laugh about it. I think it is funny, but I think it's true. People used to think, and we've seen that as well. People now say they're very conservative instead of somewhat conservative because they look at the national scene, especially 10 years ago, and they're, oh, I'm not a liberal, I'm not a moderate, I must be a conservative, because if these people are moderates, then that's not who I am. The generic legislative ballot, this is a standard question we look at over time. If the election for state legislator in your area were held today, would you be voting for the Republican candidate or the Democrat candidate? Nationally, I know a lot of people think, oh, Oklahoma's a red state. It's been a red state for a long time. It really hasn't been. This is just back to '96. You can see very competitive races on the generic ballot through 2008. It wasn't until we headed into the 2010 election cycle, after we'd seen 2 years of Barack Obama, that the numbers really expanded out the other direction. We did see 2018 was a bad year for Republicans, despite us picking up seats in the legislature. The numbers really narrowed heading into the 2018 election. And I think that a lot of Republicans, especially hit its height during the summer, and we saw a lot of negativity there, but it's really rebounded since then on the Republican side. So indulge me just a little bit. I moved back to Oklahoma in 1992 after doing my 2-year sentence in D.C. And this is the state house maps. Now they won't be all identical because of course we have redistricting every 10 years. But this is how the state looked in 1992, the red being the Republicans, the blue the Democrats. See, it's actually a pretty slow progression. This is 2002 started a new map. And then in 2012 another new map. And now if you look at them both together, you can see that the transformations become fairly substantial. My team's working on the Senate maps. We've been having trouble finding the older maps to do the full progression there. But when you look at this, it makes you wonder, how is David Perryman staying in office? That's the island of blue down in the southwest. I will point out, they tend not to get Oklahoma media. We saw that with McCurtain County in the southeast. They don't get Oklahoma media as well. They're in the shriek. And it's spoken like a second district chief of staff over here. But looking at the generic ballot, one of the things that is going right now is Republican unity is at an all-time high. And if you ask Republicans who they're going to vote for, it's 81-6. This was not what people predicted when Donald Trump took office. You might remember there were some never Trumpers. There are very few, if any of them, anymore in the Republican Party, especially in Oklahoma. I think it's why you're not seeing a national challenge to President Trump in the primary. That group is really largely dissipated. Democrats are not as divided as they used to be in this state. The reality is a lot of Democrats have re-registered as Republicans. It used to be those Oklahoma Democrats that you could vote for that would vote in conservative races. That number's down to 17%. The one thing that's really changed, if I put this chart up in 1992, the urban areas you would have seen being the most Republican. That is now in rural Oklahoma, and we'll see this throughout. The future of the Democrats, we're ground zero here, and in CD5 in central Oklahoma. That's the future of the Democrat Party, is building back out that direction. They're not going to make gains in rural Oklahoma. They're going to be fighting here. This is where the front lines will be to make sure that Republicans keep the majority. Still looking at Oklahomans here a little bit, backgrounds. If we ask people if they're conservative or liberal, 64% say that they're conservative, only 17% say they're liberal, and then 14% are moderates, and those are liberals that don't like the label. But we've got, again, 64% that are conservatives. When you look at attitudes toward President Trump, I did a battery of questions. I asked about impeachment. I asked about the border wall. 49% of Oklahoma voters agree with him on both issues. 19% disagree with him on both issues. So the group I'm most interested in are the 31% that are either split on those issues or undecided on one or another. That's the key swing group in Oklahoma. So we'll look at that group as we move forward here a little bit. I talked about the media markets here. We are now at 90% of the voters are in the two great media markets. Again, if you go back to 1992, it was about 85%. These markets are growing, the others are shrinking. Looking at geographic regions, and this will really matter a lot when we get to redistricting, which is another little presentation I do at times. But we have now crossed the threshold where the two metro areas, regardless of how you do it, I realize I have people ask me all the time about why I have Washington County and Tulsa. It's a bias because I grew up in Nowata and I always thought those Washingtonian people were more like Martians anyway, more like Tulsans anyway. But the two metro areas are now a majority of the state. That was not the case in the 90s, in the 2000s. They're now a majority of the voters. If you look at those areas, and if you look at redistricting maps at times, you'll see we have what I call the wagon wheel effect, where we have a lot of seats, Senate and House seats, that come in and pick up a small group in the metro areas and then go down to the rural. In fact, in Oklahoma County, there's a person who lives in Surrey Hills, which is a nice development outside of Oklahoma City, that represents north of Enid. We have Newcastle and Blanchard represented by someone from Duncan in Stevens County. And you've got similar things in the Tulsa area as well. In fact, Logan County, Senate District 20, represents both Guthrie and touches Tulsa County. Picks up chunks of voters on both sides. So this I wanted to just see what this group felt compared to others. So if you are comfortable with your phones here, if you can text that there, and you can just enter, if you're on that text mode, just text A, B, or C. Do you think things in Oklahoma are headed in the right direction, or do you think things have pretty seriously gotten off on the track? A for right direction, B for wrong direction. See if you're uncertain at this point.
Hold on, man.
I will. You can. You text the message to 22333, and I'm going to give you times to look at that instruction. I'm going to find a glass of water somewhere if I could. Can I get a glass of water? It is anonymous. It is anonymous, and I will attest that I will clear everything as soon as it's done. But the system does not allow me to do that. It's part of the political science research code of ethics to keep any polling anonymous. So I will do that.
Junior achievement gives young people the
Everybody
skills
ready
they
to
need
move
to
forward?
own their economic success,
This is a
plan
very
for their
optimistic
future,
group.
and make smart.
Doesn't surprise me because my guess is we have mostly Republicans here. We'll look at it here, but this is compared to the state. The state right now is 59 right track, 28 wrong track. Those are really, really much better numbers than we saw last year, and they continue to improve. Last June, I believe, was the worst numbers I had, which was 17 right track, 71 wrong track. Thank you. It was an incredibly negative environment. I will just point you out some of the historical places here. Over on the far left, this is in early 1994. 32 right track, 55 wrong track. Anybody want to know? Anybody take a guess of why that number was so negative? This was about 10 days after David Walters pled guilty to campaign finance violations. The environment was so negative, that's when he decided, during that plea, he agreed not to run again. Then, in early May of the next year, the numbers had flipped dramatically and became very right track. Any ideas? 1995. The bombing. After the Oklahomans' reaction to the bombing, it changed how we thought about ourselves for quite a long time. The Oklahoma Standard is born, and we see those numbers stay very high. Of course, with my pro-Frank Keating hat, I am a partisan Republican. I'll talk about that. It stayed really good during his entire tenure. Then we see some real negative numbers. That was after the economic problems following September 11th. We saw a little spike immediately after September 11th, but after economic problems, then we saw the negativity. We then see in 2007, end of 2006, started 2007, a really high point again. This was during the centennial celebration. And then we just see kind of middling kind of numbers. And when you look at this in retrospect now, the fascinating aspect about this is that we didn't have right track numbers really strong when oil was over $100 a barrel. And so that's really one of the things that's most interesting, I think, about this. But then we see the intense negativity, the concern, which was led by Affluent. It was focused on education issues and education funding, and we saw that negativity there. And then, we see just a change, even though it's a change within the party, leadership in the state, the numbers just really flipped to become dramatic numbers. So by January of 2019, we're 49 right track. And the other thing that's amazing is it's been a long time since I've seen numbers get better during the legislative session rather than worse. No offense to any of the legislators here. But generally your highest numbers are when the State of the State address is given, and then they drop down, and the worst numbers are in May and June. This year they got better.
I'm just trying to go back. Each time there's a new governor, what is it?
It depends. So 2002 is Brad Henry. The numbers are kind of negative. They're on their way down. When he's reelected in 2006, the numbers are really high. 2010, they're on their way down when we have Governor Fallon. So, there is a little bit of a cycle there. It's different than presidential, where you generally see the M1 supply increase during presidential years, and so there seems to be a benefit for incumbents. That's not necessarily the case when it comes on the state side here. Republicans, very optimistic. This group more optimistic than the state as a whole, but statewide, 73% are Republicans think things are going in the right direction. And Democrats are evenly split, 45 to 40. They're pretty pleased with how things are going. And given Republican control of the legislature and the governor's office, it's pretty impressive. And you'll notice that rural residents are more optimistic than urban. That has not generally been the case, but they are right now. Here's another one. We'll see here. This can be interesting in different places. Hopefully it's not real interesting here, but you have a favorable, unfavorable impression of Donald Trump. Count it down to see if anybody's bold enough to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, well, this group is much more enthusiastic about the president and the state as a whole, yet this state is still probably one of the better ones for the president. 61 favorable, 33 unfavorable. Very solid numbers. These are the highest numbers we've had for him. Now, I will tell you, I believe this was in March. It was after the government shut down, but not a great deal after that. But I don't see any reason why his numbers would have narrowed here in the state. This compares with other presidents. You can see that George W. Bush's numbers reached a peak of 76% in the state. That was after the response to September 11th. But we do see that Obama's negative numbers were higher than Trump's positive numbers here. And, but still, these are very solid numbers for the president. Again, Republicans, I mentioned earlier, the never Trumpers are just not around much anymore. 86-10 among Republicans. A third of Democrats in this state have a favorable opinion of the president, and especially in the rural areas. There are real differences. And I know I have people from Mullen's shop and Congressman Hearns. Congressman Hearns represents a much more difficult seat these days. In CD1, it's 52 favorable, 43 unfavorable. I would fully expect the president to carry the 1st district again. I expect him to carry it fairly substantially. The reality is, this is kind of a reflection on him. At some point, the election is not a reflection on Donald Trump. It's a choice between two people. And I know there are, 87 candidates for president on the Democrat side now, but I'm not sure there are any of them without serious flaws. But you do see in CD5, which is the one held by a Democrat, Trump has a 13-point advantage. I have another survey out where I have Trump winning CD5 by 8 points, which is what he won by last time there against Joe Biden if we test that. But you can see Congressman Mullen, Congressman Lucas, they should do everything they can to stand right beside Donald Trump, and they'll be very well served there. We ask about impeachment proceedings. Republicans are opposed to it. Democrats are split, 45-42 in this state. This becomes, it helps anytime we have Democrats talk about impeachment here, it helps Republicans. Because they can debate and fight amongst themselves on that issue. Was Trump right to declare a national emergency to fund the border wall? 54-38. No, I mean, the numbers are a little bit lower here than they are for his overall favorable rating. We do have an element among Republicans here. You can see it's 15% opposed, only the 78% support versus the 86 and 90 on the pro-Trump side. That's acknowledge or suggest an economic necessity of immigration reform, and they take more of a libertarian approach about workforce being an economic commodity, and so we see a little bit difference there. The reality is, don't get me wrong, I think love's more powerful than hate, but when it comes to being a motivator, hate's more motivated than love. And Nancy Pelosi is not beloved in this state. 58% strongly unfavorable. You might remember only 44% have a strongly favorable opinion of Donald Trump. And so there's greater intensity against Nancy Pelosi in this state than there is support for the president. And where that plays out and matters the most is probably in CD5, where Kendra Horn voted for Nancy Pelosi to be speaker. And I will fully expect every voter will know that come election day. It reminds me, I'm sure you guys, there are people in here who remember the 1994 Inhofe campaign against Dave McCurdy. I think a lot of people recall and have heard about the bug zapper spot that won the awards. It actually aired once at 2 a.m. During a late night showing of the Rush Limbaugh show. And they might remember one about midnight basketball and players in tutus. That one did, but the one that moved numbers was the one that for 30 seconds just had Dave McCurdy saying, "I second the nomination of Bill Clinton, I second the nomination of Bill, I second the nomination of Bill Clinton." It was 30 seconds, just that's what moved the numbers. That's what you'll see here is her saying she voted for Nancy Pelosi, figuring something out there. Here we have another question here. And I will not tell your sponsor, Gateway Mortgage, how you this down. Yeah, I expected that kind of number here. Everybody I know is there. His numbers are incredible right now. Statewide is 68-15. He is more popular than the president. And again, one of the things that's amazing here is generally the legislature and the governor take hits during the legislative session. He did not. After his State of the State address, he was a 53-16. After the session, he's at 68.15. These are really incredible numbers. Now, I know there are people in here that spent time in the Capitol, and there are others that might have heard rumors of fights between second floor, I guess it's first floor this year technically, and fourth floor, or any issues there. The voters don't see any of that. They saw harmony, they saw things get done, they saw accomplishments. Very pleased. That's why the right track numbers are so much stronger, and his numbers are incredible. And 82-5 among Republicans. Among Democrats, at 53-25, a 2-to-1 positive there. Wow. Unites urban and rural. So I will tell you, I tend to be a glass half full guy though. So when I look at these, I want to make everybody clear, these numbers aren't sustainable. I mean, I hope they are. I'll do everything I can to make sure they stay that way. But don't be surprised if his numbers start to drop. These are stratospheric types of numbers. I haven't seen anything, but I'm waiting. There's a group called, is it NewGov or YouGov that does online polling or random cell phone digit polling. They do it across the country. I don't know how accurate they really are, but they do it cheaply, so they test all the governors. I would not be surprised to see him be one of the 3 or 4 most popular governors in the nation with these kind of numbers. Here's why I say the numbers can't last. If you look among those that say they vote almost always Democrat or more Democrats than Republicans, his numbers aren't that bad. His supporters are united, his opponents are still divided. There are natural predators out there that fundamentally do not like his conservative approach, and they will find out about that and glom onto it at some point. So the numbers will narrow, but as long as he does well with that 47-12 among person over the party, people that put the person over the party, that 4-to-1 ratio is a great ratio. Generally, you're excited at a 2-to-1 ratio, and he's at 4-to-1 there. His numbers are very, very solid. The state legislature, not quite as good. No offense to anybody here. I've got the comparison to 2007. Deliberative bodies tend to always have poor numbers because people don't understand what they do, and I do think a larger percentage of them go into the only fair category where we see it's at 41. But really, we're at 24 positive, 22 negative, and then the 41 that probably could do better, but I don't really have that opinion. I'll bore you here with a little bit of my story here. That only fair, I used to really think that was a negative in most people. I think it probably still is, and I use that. I have a daughter who just got her master's degree at TU, sitting for the CPA, bought a house. When she was going to school, if I went to a teacher's meeting and they told me she was doing only fair, I would have been devastated. My 20-year-old son, who's moved back home and is trying to join a band, I dropped to my knees and praised the Lord. So it is a little bit matter of perspective if that's a positive or a negative. But in the legislature, it's viewed a little bit more, I'm afraid, like my daughter. When we look at the governor's numbers, again, in this kind of metric, again, very strong numbers. 55 in the positive, only 8 in the negative, and 20 in that only fair category. So this is a little bit different one here, and I don't know if we have enough people participating or not, but here what I'd like you to do is just type your answer to this. If you have multiple things, put them all in one entry, because if you enter again, it'll delete the older one. But what's the most important issue facing Oklahoma's leaders today? We'll take just a little bit of time here. But if you are going to enter, try to, I've got a little bit of a, this also tell me how many people are participating. As it gets more, it'll keep changing here. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, so if you look at this, and if someone has something else, it's fine. It does look like education. Looks like in this group even is the top issue. We do see spending, health, economic development, a few other issues there, but education is the top issue. And that's pretty close to what the public is, with education being the top. The public, now this is earlier in the session. I do think this has changed a little bit, but education has still been dominating if it's the top of mind questions you ask somebody about. You do see a few others there, but you do see healthcare, you see infrastructure, see better roads, but it's primarily money for and budget, education, schools, and teachers. However, if I do a forced choice, and I give people, I've got these 5 categories, which is most important to you when you vote? Education issues like teacher pay, economic issues like taxes and lowering the cost of doing business and growing jobs, funding for mental health and substance abuse needs, providing more government efficiency and transparency in government, or providing better access to and affordability for health care. 31% say education, but if you combine those 2 healthcare categories, mental health and healthcare access, that's at 29%. It's really growing. It's the one that's growing so much. And the mental health and substance abuse treatment has been growing so quickly, that's why I have it be its own category now. You can see that those numbers are there. There's not as much of a difference between Republicans and Democrats as you might think. Republicans a little more interested in government efficiency and transparency. Democrats a little more interested in mental health and health care. But even among Republicans, 24% pick one of those healthcare categories. By age and income, healthcare really increases with age. And we see that the one thing that's pretty constant is actually the education issue. It pops a little bit under 45-year-olds, but otherwise it's fairly consistent. Then it pops again among the most affluent. A few other issues, and some of these were things that I'll go through them very quickly, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have on it. When we were going through, I looked at this when the so-called Unity Bill was being discussed in the legislature. State Question 788 expressly said that that employers could not discipline an employee if they had a medical marijuana card, if they had marijuana in their system. The voters, yes, they supported 788, but they did not like that component, and this was very clear. There's a lot of discussion about criminal justice reform. I just want to caution on the political side, some people there, you can't go too far. One of the things proposed originally, I don't think they had a bill for it, but it was in their presentation early on. The criminal justice group was to lower the 85% crimes. Those are crimes where you have to spend 85% of your time before you're eligible for release, dropping that to 60%. The voters are not there. So you can't, I just want their caution to go too far there. And I've been involved in a number of campaigns, and anybody wants to see them, I can show you what we call our blue crime spot. There's nothing that can change that plays on the emotions of voters quicker than crime stories. Moving on to the opioid settlement. This was asked about the Purdue Pharmaceutical settlement, the $270 million. You can see the wording of it down there at the bottom. I'll read it to you. As you may or may not know, a settlement between the state and one of the 3 opioid manufacturers named in the lawsuit was reached for $70 million. This money will primarily be used for funding a world-class addiction research center in conjunction with Oklahoma State University and the Tulsa campus, and is protected for years to come. Do you think this deal is a good deal, good thing, or a bad thing for Oklahoma? Overwhelmingly a good thing. I know there was a legislature come out after that, but again, this is one of those things that I think that debate is kind of in the weeds, and I don't fault any legislator or anybody by saying this is the process, how the process should be. Be careful doing that you don't ever let that come off as being negative toward the settlement itself. The opioid issue is something else I've looked at. If you ask people, I mean, this is amazing, when more people in Oklahoma can tell you that there's an opioid lawsuit than can tell you who the vice president is. That's how strong it is. What about 57% of Oklahoma voters can name the vice president? Say, who's the vice president? Now, if you said Mike Pence, they'd say, oh, he's the vice president. If you ask them to name the vice president, we're about 57% that can name it. If we say there's a lawsuit going on in Oklahoma right now that's in the news, can you tell me what that is? About 72% say opioids. So it's something on the top of their mind. Now we'll move to the one I think that this brings everybody around. I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation on this. I will tell you, this is not the identical question that I ask of voters, but it's very close. I just shortened it a little bit, but in essence it's the same thing. But it's a reflection of State Question 802, and I'll read it the way it was to the voters. State Question 802 amends the Oklahoma Constitution. It expands the state's Medicaid program in Oklahoma to include low-income adults between the ages of 18 and 65 with incomes that do not exceed 133% of the federal level or as permitted under federal Medicaid laws. If this election were held today, would you be voting yes for this proposal, or would you be voting no against it? All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, hold on here. So it's still moving. I'll let it go a little bit more. So we're at 44 yes, 56 no. Not, I mean, it flips the overall number there, but it's, we got 44 against, so that's up. I mean, 56 against, so it's a 23-point difference there. But it's 48-33 for the population as a whole. Your numbers were not that much different than the Republicans, which are at 32-45. I will tell you, 802 starts out popular. I think it would take a funded campaign to defeat it, but I do think a funded campaign would defeat it and could defeat it. We'll go through some of those messages here. This reminds me a lot of State Question 779, the Bourne tax for education, in a couple of different ways. I want to be real clear here. I am talking about the politics of this, not the policy. We can debate that all the time. There are people probably in this room much smarter than I know there are people much smarter than I am in this room, much more side than I am, that could probably talk about the policy, if it's the right thing or not to do. Just from the politics of it, it reminds me of 779. In one, that it can be defeated, and number two, that it's not going to go, that the issue is not going to go away even if it is defeated. Yes.
Hey, Pat, who would write this bill?
So what?
Who would write the bill?
Well, this State Question 802, this is testing the one that if they get the signatures will be on the ballot. This would be a state question.
Say, who's going to write State Question 802?
It's already been written.
Yeah.
Who writes
It
it?
just had oral arguments.
That does what's put in the Constitution.
It does, and we'll go through some of that here. But this is just testing if this gets to the ballot.
My point is, who writes it? The state of Oklahoma will not write this. This will be written by people out of state, and they're going to take it and put it on the initiative petition. This will not be Oklahomans that write this.
It's already been written and challenged, and
Right.
we've had the oral arguments.
Correct, and it's moving forward, and so this is what we have on the plate now. This is what's being handed to Oklahoma voters to consume, and right now, and I'll go through arguments for and against here in just a minute, and that's one I have not tested out of state folks here, but I think there are some others here that will resonate. Again, I'm talking about the politics of it. One of the things that jumps out to me is that the Democrats are fairly united at 68-18. Look at the Republican split. Of everything I've asked this group today, this is the one that's been the most divisive. I mean, we were at 100% on Stitt, 100% on Trump, right track numbers in the 90s. This is the one that was kind of split. And what it does is, just like I talked about how I would like the Democrats to talk about impeachment of Trump because it splits their base, the longer this issue is talked about, the more it splits the Republican base.
Would the state question add to the tax liability of Oklahomans? Or does it raise taxes?
No, it doesn't say how it's funded.
Okay, so that's
It's an unfunded mandate.
Well, and we'll get to some of those arguments here in a little bit. Let me get through here a little bit.
yeah.
Just to point out again here, those, and again, I'm not talking about the policy here. We're talking about the politics over here. If you're against Trump, you're all for this, 86-2. If you're for Trump, it's split, 29-44. So when I look at these kind of numbers, I say, hey, I know how to talk to these folks. If I'm on the no side, I know how to change their mind. I think things can happen. I think you can move that and make this a very competitive race. The glass half empty Republican in me says, oh my gosh, when I see those pro-Trump numbers, those anti-Trump numbers, they're like that. If I'm George Soros, I see a state question that can take unlimited corporate funding, and I can canvass door to door in Oklahoma CD5 and drag everybody out to vote. That's what I'm going to do to protect that seat. And so that's one of my concerns here when I see this kind of dichotomy here. And I will tell you, I believe, I'm not going to go right there. I might later. Here's one of the challenges for the no side, is the income line. I think we'd all expect if you make less than $25,000 a year, you're probably supportive of this expansion. That's what you have on the left. What's a little surprising, I think, at first glance to some people, is how supportive those that make over $100,000 and over $150,000 are. And I've done some work on this. One of the things they believe is that I am paying for these people to get medical care. I'm just doing it through higher insurance rates. I mean, there's not one, the story of, there's not one less kid getting a broken arm in Oklahoma because we're not taking Medicaid expansion. They're also getting the treatment. It's just that the providers are having to shift that burden somewhere else as they take care of broken arms, sickness, whatever it is. Here it is, my ideology. One of the things that's happened here is the yes side is grouped together. The liberals and the moderates are very supportive, but even those that define themselves as being somewhat conservative, we have 45% supporting, 37% opposed. And among self-described very conservative voters, and my guess is there are a lot of people here that say, you're not very conservative if you're for this, but if you self-describe as being very conservative, only 49% opposed. Again, this is like the Trump numbers I said. I know how to talk to those very conservative voters. Generally, I can rally them up and get them to be opposed, just like I did with defeating the Bourne sales tax, which started out more popular than this. There are some challenges. So this is a study that nobody paid for. I have an omnibus survey that I'm able to ask some questions on to give myself an understanding to do for presentations like this. But because of that, and because I'm a conservative, I do it on the cheap. So normally on a survey, I would test each one of these messages independently. But instead what I did was said, now I want to read you 4 reasons to vote yes on Medicaid expansion. Tell me which one of these you think is the most important. And then I do 4 messages, 4 reasons to vote no, which one's most important. Half the people got the yes ones first, half the people got the no ones first. Everybody got all 8 messages. And so the reasons to vote yes I had was, this will help families that don't have health care get it. This will help rural hospitals that are closing throughout the state. The other states have expanded and they're taking our federal dollars. This is a way to bring our federal dollars back home. And then the cost shifting argument that this will help lower insurance rates. The key takeaway from this is that only 17% of the people refuse to answer one of those. That means you've got 83% of Oklahomans that at least see one of those messages having some sort of salience. They're divided quite a bit, but if you look at some of the swing groups, you're going to find that really it's about lowering insurance rates and helping rural hospitals among those who move toward voting yes. Those who say that Governor Stitt's doing a good job, not an excellent job, not a fair report, but a good job, that's a key critical group. You can see they want to help those with no health care and help rural hospitals. So the no reasons I use, and I'd be anxious to hear if anybody's got any other ideas. I think it being written by out-of-state folk is something that's a good one there. But if we say this is another step in Obamacare and a move to universal health care and a single-payer system. The states who have expanded this have had tremendous cost overruns. You can't trust the federal government to fulfill their commitment to fund 90% of the program, and that it should be statutory. It's wrong to put this in the Constitution where the legislature can't react in a timely manner. Here, we get 78% that pick something, so it's a little bit higher of those that say that are the refuse to acknowledge any of these messages. And they're really simple messages for me to convey or someone else to convey in a no campaign of you can't trust the federal government is the key one there, and that it's Obamacare. And you see among those that move no, it's that, oh, I don't want to go to a universal payer, single payer universal system. One of the challenges for a no campaign or a yes campaign on both sides is that with those messages, and those were very concisely, without the emotion that video, even print can deliver, the numbers don't change much. It goes to 49 yes, 35 no, still below that critical mass of 50. But the no votes don't go up that much with those messages. We do see Democrats become more supportive and Republicans become a little bit more opposed. So what will start to happen is people start to say, oh, this is the team I'm on. The Republicans are against this. I must be against it too. I'm a conservative against this. So that's why I think it would break if it gets to the state question. If there's funded opposition, which I think is a big if. And the other states have done this, there's not been funded opposition. If there's funded opposition, I think it can break and become a no vote. I think there is that real potential here for it to end up not being successful. Just to remind you, Bourne started at 65% support. But it had a fatal flaw when you told people that a quarter of it went to higher ed, not to common ed. and so this does not at this point have that fatal flaw that's one message. But I do think that you can see the teams kind of people picking sides and moving there. The challenge is it will take a lot of political capital, particularly from our governor, to kill this, and elected officials. I'm not saying it's, and again, I'm not a policy person. I have every confidence that Governor Stitt will do what the right policy is, regardless of the politics. That's why he's a great leader, and that's what will happen. But it would take political capital to do this. There is another option I looked at. This question said it has been discussed and proposed that the legislature and the governor come up with a plan. And I did use the word, I said in the question, I actually said for Medicaid expansion that has additional components, and the 4 components, such as, and I listed 4 components. It would go away if the federal government reneged on their 90% commitment. It would have a work requirement for able-bodied. It would have the participants pay at least a token premium for being in the program, and it would allow private insurance companies to provide the coverage instead of the state Medicaid system. Knowing this, which would you prefer to see? An Oklahoma plan, no expansion at all and keep things the way they are today, or fully expand as originally proposed by 802? This flips the script. Instead of Republicans being divided, this divides Democrats. You see 48% want an Oklahoma plan, 22% still want full expansion, so they would oppose the Oklahoma plan, 21% want no expansion. So if you can get to the critical mass, I think you all have heard the thing. I mean, in politics it's true, not necessarily on policy. If you're making both sides mad, you're probably doing something right. And so this is a bell curve where you have the 48% kind of in the middle, the 21 and 22 on the extremes of being full expansion or no expansion. So from a political standpoint, it makes sense. Again, I'm not going to speak toward the policy. And look what it does to Democrats. 36% of Democrats oppose an Oklahoma plan because they want full expansion instead. This would be what a Democrat primary would largely be decided on if you're for an Oklahoma plan or if you're for expansion to be different in each seat. Even among those that are initially against 802, 2% say they want an Oklahoma plan after hearing the arguments. I talked about the Democrat primary. Among Democrats that voted primary, it's actually even closer. 37 full expansion, 41 an Oklahoma plan. Even among very conservative voters, 55% start with wanting an Oklahoma plan. So that kind of ends everything. We have to answer any questions. If you would, this is my favorite survey question. Which of the following will you do? Will you follow me on Twitter? Will you hire me for survey needs? Or will you do all of the above?
Do you have a hard copy of all your charts?
I don't know that I do, but I can make one. I can make it something available online. I don't have any hard copies with me here. Anyway, with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. I have a lot of other data on other issues. If I can remember it, I'll tell you. If I can't remember it, I'll make it up and you won't know.
How many people were in your sampling?
Most of these were at least 500 or 6. All of them were 500. There were a couple of those that were 600 sample surveys.
Random across the state?
Yep, I have a full voter list, and over half of them were on mobile phones.
Pat, I want to publicly thank you. You've been very generous over the years sharing your political insights. We used to have you in, and I had the honor of being the Republican Caucus Chairman at the House. You come annually and share your information with the members. I know people pay thousands and thousands of dollars to glean this insight from you, and I just wanted to publicly thank you for being so willing to share.
Oh, I appreciate it. I will tell you, every single time I do one of these presentations, I think about Representative Wright. Because the first time I met him, we were in Stroud. I was doing a presentation when he was first elected, and my computer crashed. And I was frantic, and I grabbed his computer and just used it, and he just let me go forward. And we had not met at any other time. So he is why I always try to have a backup plan available whenever I move someplace, because I know I'm not always going to have someone as free with his equipment as he was. Anybody else have a question? Yes.
Just a quick question into the mind of the pollster and the mind of the lawyer. On your on your Medicaid, on your marijuana question, you asked if the employer could discipline. And I'm curious why you chose the word discipline, because the mind of the lawyer says that the employer's greatest challenge is to have somebody that's a threat to themselves, a threat to other workers, and a threat to the clientele. So I'm curious why you chose the word discipline, where really what the employer's greatest concern is going to be for liability is going to be safety.
Okay. Well, here's the couple of things. One, being a lawyer is one sin I won't have to account for. So that's,
Amen.
But the reason we did that, and that was a group I was working with some business leaders on that question. The state question itself said you couldn't discipline.
Okay.
And so, regardless of what everything else was at the end, we wanted to be able to say in our message that, yes, the voters supported 788, but they don't like this. So you're not undoing the will of the people by letting us have safety issues. I had another question on there, just to take time to share about, and it was actually the numbers were higher, where we asked, in order to protect the safety of the employee and others and customers and others, can they put in programs? And those numbers are even higher.
Right, because I know it's a challenge to come up with a question where people don't attack the question.
Right. No, and we had another question I just didn't share here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. Appreciate it.
On issues and on personalities, can you come up with a general statement of how independents break out?
They are different in different localities. In the metro areas, your independents are more likely to be left-leaning. In your rural areas, they're more likely to be right-leaning in this state. The independents in the rural areas are still people that, my grandpa was an FDR Democrat, I can't vote Republican. A lot of your independents, especially in the core parts of the cities, are socialist progressives, and that's the growing trend there. So I can't do a blanket statement there. What I will tell you is they are only about 60% as likely to vote as somebody who chooses a Republican or a Democrat label. They just don't participate to vote as often.
Have you done a study on whether Democrats identify as socialists versus really Democrats?
I did a question here. I took that out of time. I wish I had it. You saw the chart I had about conservative and liberal. I did another question where I asked, do you consider yourself to be a conservative? Which label do you prefer? Conservative, liberal, centrist, libertarian, progressive, socialist, and I ended up at 55% conservative, 9% libertarian. So that conservative kind of group was still really there. So on that one, I remember that one off the top of my head. But I think we had 4% socialist and 10% progressive. So they weren't huge numbers, but they were almost all in the two metro areas. Or, some in Stillwater and in Norman, a few college campuses.
With CD5 going blue, and the urban area of Tulsa, metropolitan Tulsa, having but one state representative that's Republican, all the other state representatives in Tulsa that are fully Tulsa, they don't touch the suburbs, they all went Democrat. What would you say to us that what's the message and what did we miss? Does Horn teach us anything?
I think so. Part of it is a little beyond our control. I mean, nobody likes to hear that. But everybody has seen those county maps of the presidential race across the country, and you've got just the urban areas voted for Hillary. The reality is, when you get densely populated areas, they tend to vote Democrat instead of Republican. And so that is part of what's happening. But I will also tell you, I think our failure to address education earlier exacerbated that in the metro areas. The other thing that happened this last election cycle was Donald Trump. And it's easier to motivate people in urban areas. Like I said, I moved back to Oklahoma in '92. That entire time, as a party, we've primarily run against a Clinton or an Obama. And we've done a really good job of running against things. We haven't been as good, quite frankly, as running for things. Well, the Democrats captured that. It's really easy to run against Donald Trump. I don't care if it's a county office, a city council office, anything else. You say, we're going to go show Donald Trump. I can get you 20 people in pink hats out there knocking doors, moving and mobilized. And that's what they were able to do in the metro areas. I think that's one of the things that happened. So I would also tell you, I think the key thing you need to do is be really involved in redistricting as things move forward.
You have to have the majority to do that.
Well, but
I'm saying that's an amen.
Yeah.
With the resurgence in abortion bills around the country, I didn't see any pro-life issues on your questions. I mean, did you do that intentionally? Have you done other pro-life stuff?
We've looked at pro-life issues over time, and I haven't seen those change much in 20, 30 years. We are a reliably pro-life state, and so I look at that periodically. I just didn't have it on this. So I do. One of the key groups I always look for are pro-life Democrats. How their voting really matters in statewide elections. And hopefully I'm going to be involved in a pro-life state question they're actually doing in Kansas here soon. So their Supreme Court really went to the left.
Pat, on criminal justice reform, what do you think, or what's your takeaway, the message from the people to the legislature? Do you have a feeling?
I think they want to make certain that what they're spending is being spent wisely. But I am seeing concerns about crime really start to escalate in different places. I'm especially seeing it among small business communities and retailers when they change the misdemeanor level for crimes from $500 to $1,000. I think there's starting to be some in the public that are recognizing that ankle monitors are considered still in DOC custody and counting toward those bed counts. I think we're starting to see a little bit of a trend the other way. Now, don't get me wrong. I think they want to make sure money's spent right. I think there is real concerns of voters, again, especially in the metro areas, that we are creating kind of a debtor's prison type of scenario, or where we have a bail system. This, again, restricted to the metro areas, that we keep people from, it launches them into a cycle. But there is no desire to get anybody with any sort of violent record out on the streets. I mean, I think there's a lot of. I don't think all the terms are very well defined in voters' minds about what a nonviolent crime is. For example, domestic violence by strangulation is a nonviolent crime. Partial birth abortion is a nonviolent crime. I mean, these are things that I think people don't fully understand.
Are you, kind of to Senator Rader's question, are you seeing any kind of significant defection for Republican voters voting for the Democratic candidates in districts like 71, the seat that was held by Katie Hinkey, the seat flip that was held by Weldon Watson? Was there a significant Republican defection in those races?
Yes. Yeah, some of those places had a majority of the people who voted were Republicans, yet the Republican didn't win. And the Democrats have, especially in the urban areas, have really targeted, and they're going door to door on a regular basis, college-educated white women between the age with kids in home. I mean, it's the soccer mom, the classic soccer mom. And we have seen more and more split households when it comes to how people are voting than any other elections I've ever seen.
Pat, it seems like the urban areas are going blue, and what do we do to stop that trend? At least other statistics, presentations I've seen, that seems to be happening all over the country.
Well, the reality is it's happened all over the country, other places first. and we're a little bit lagging on that here. I think we've got to find things to run for. I think we've got to find things to invigorate our own people to go door to door, to address these top issue concerns. And it's a phenomenon with that vote density, that denser population. That we've got to find the right way to do that. And I think we've moved some places. So we can say that we have Republican, even though it's a nonpartisan seats, we have Republican mayors in our largest cities. I mean, people can talk about conservative or not, but I think that they've shown a way and developed a way to talk to voters in a different manner as well. And I think we can learn some things there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Pat, can you talk about the correlation of how high the executive branch approval rating is and Oklahoma electing Tulsans to run the executive branch?
No. No, okay, I'm not sure there's a correlation there, but I think anytime you enlarge the pool of who you have serving, I think it's a good thing. Sometimes change is a positive, and I think that's a situation that we really had there. I don't want to speak ill of Mary Fallon, and I won't, but sometimes just a change in leadership does things, and we've all seen it with college football programs. Sometimes, nothing about the old coach or something like that, but sometimes a new coach just helps. And I think we've seen that happen, and I think tapping into a pool that was probably underutilized before has probably been a benefit.
On the issue of education, do you have any polling, or have you done any polling that tries to indicate or tries to gain a perspective on the voters' concern over education funding versus their concern over education results? In other words, we have failing schools, but really in 18 it became a question about funding and taxation and that.
I'm anxious. If you know somebody who wants to do it, I would love to do another new in-depth study on education. But even in 16, 17, 18, we asked people what's most important in education: reforms that get outcomes or funding, and it was always about 65-35 for reforms. But then you turn around and ask those same people, but do you want to spend more money? Would you spend more money on schools without reforms? And it was like 70, yes. And so I think that the funding was, and again, I don't want to get into the policy side here, but there was certainly a perception that schools were underfunded, and that was bought and believed. And so until we can do any reforms, we had to take care of that crisis first, even if they didn't think it was the most important issue. I'll tell you, school choice still polls very, very high. People think that, it's silly that we can choose our hospital, we can choose our doctor, we can choose where we buy a car, we can choose where we buy a house, but we can't choose where we send our kids to school. But it was like, no, if people say that's going to hurt school funding, I'm against that then. But they like that first part. But I think we're getting close to where you now have the talking point, a two teacher family now makes more than $100,000 a year. And that's a pretty valid talking point. Anything else? All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Let's give Pat another round of applause. Stay on the lookout for an announcement regarding our July meeting. If you need to get your parking validated, you can. Thank you everyone who pre-registered and paid beforehand. We had to up the pay chart because that's what the summit asked us to pay now for. So if you didn't register, it's $35. That's what they're charging us. So if you haven't paid yet, please do. If not, you are dismissed.